Okay, I am here with August Turak and his new book, Brother John, a monk, a pilgrim, and a purpose of life. And it's a winner of the Templeton Prize. First, tell us what brought you to the monastery. I'm reading from some of the materials here that you were having what you described as a midlife crisis.
Right. I was an entrepreneur. I had a couple of companies I'd started on just a few bucks with a couple of partners, but I always coached college students at the University of North Carolina, Duke. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and they convinced me to go skydiving with them. And I was too old to go skydiving, but also not brave enough to tell them I was too old to go skydiving. So I go skydiving, I break my ankle terribly, compound fracture, end up in the hospital, start experiencing panic attacks. And the worst part of it all was I realized I was facing my mortality for the first time. And when I reached back for my Catholic faith in order to support me, it wasn't there. And that exacerbated things terribly, and I went into a depression. And then a few months after that, I'm trying to fight my way out of this, what I eventually called my 2-year dark night of the soul. And I get a telephone call from one of my students, and he said, "Hey, Augie," he said, "I'm actually taking your advice. I wanted you to know that." I said, "What advice?" He said, "You told us to do something meaningful with our summer vacation rather than drink beer and chase girls." And I said, "I don't remember saying that, but what are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm at a Trappist monastery in South Carolina called Mepkin Abbey, and I'm spending the whole summer here as a monastic guest." And suddenly, without even realizing what I was saying, I said, "I want to come now." And then I realized I couldn't. It was Wednesday, and I was at work at my company. I said, "No, this weekend." And he said, "Well, let me go ask Brother John." And that was the first time I ever heard Brother John's name. And he came back a few minutes later and said, "Come on down." I went the next weekend, and the next weekend after that, and then I applied to become a monastic guest, and I came back for 3 weeks at the Christmas time, and that was 1996. And that's when the episode that became this book took place. And eventually I went through a 2-year dark night, and the monks helped me tremendously. I had a spiritual director there, Father Christian, and that's a whole subject for another book, because I ended up having this spiritual experience that fundamentally brought me out of it and kept me out of it ever since. But what happened then is in 2004, I sold my businesses by then. I'd gone off to St. John's University to study theology, come back, and one of my former students said, there's this contest, there's this essay contest with the Templeton Foundation. You ought to write an essay for it. Well, I'd never written anything in my life before, but I said, okay, and I checked it out. I only had a week left, or 10 days left in the contest. It was 3,500 words or less. What is the purpose of life? So I started trying to write something, and I wasn't getting anywhere. And one of my other students asked me about it. I said, "No, I'm not getting anywhere." He said, "Why don't you write that story about Brother John on Christmas that you love telling so much?" And I thought, wow, that's a good idea. So I banged it out in a couple of days, spent 2 more days editing it, shipped it off to the Templeton Foundation. 6 months later, I get a telephone call. "You're the grand prize winner, $100,000. I won $100,000 for that essay." Then they flew me to New York, and I became Rick Warren was there. Rick Warren gave me he was one of the judges. He did the keynote speech, and that radically transformed my life. I took that $100,000 and I just started saying, wow, the meaning and purpose. With this book, the essay, Brother John, was reprinted in the Best of Christian Writings, the Best of Catholic Writings. It led to me becoming a leadership contributor for Forbes magazine. Then I wrote an article for Forbes called The Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks, because I sat down one weekend and I said, why are these monks so good at business? They're all 70 years old. They only work 4 hours a day. They keep silence all the time, yet everything they touch in the business, and they don't care about business, and yet everything they touch seems to turn to gold. And they've been doing it for 1,000 years. So what's their secret? And I wrote an article. Forbes published it. It went viral, and it became. So then I was approached by Columbia Business School, and they said, "How about doing a book called Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks?" So I published that, and that led to me becoming a contributor on the BBC, which I also do. And then just last summer, somebody stopped by my house, an executive vice president from BB&T Bank, and he said that his wife had left him, and he really hit the skids, and he was all suicidal, and he came across Brother John, the essay, and that led him to the monastery, and that turned his life around, and he was coming all the way to driving 4 hours just to thank me for writing Brother John. And
God works in talk about God working in mysterious ways.
Absolutely. So as soon as he left, I called this woman who works with me, and I said, "Listen, that's God telling me that I got this candle, and it's under a bushel basket. It's the essay's 14 years old now, but how do you turn a 3,500 word essay into a book that I could give to other people to help them? Because this guy was not the only person that had written to me saying that Brother John had really manifested. So I hit upon the idea of turning it into an illustrated book. And then I found this.
And this is the book, The Cup, and that's the paintings are just beautiful in that book.
Exactly, and I came across this multiple award-winning author who happens to be Irish Catholic, who actually said to me, wow, this is a tremendous opportunity because I can't do religious themed stuff because it's, in our culture today, anything with a religious theme in the art world is death. He said nobody wants to see it, and so he did 22 oil paintings for this book, Brother John. And then, of course, it turns out to be the right book at the right time because we're really suffering through a crisis of purpose and meaning.
Well, I think that, well, talk about summing things up concisely. Well, the book is Brother John, a Monk, a Pilgrim, and a Purpose of Life. The illustrations are by Jen Harrington and the author, August Turak. Thank you so much for your time.
It's not coming out until October. I wanted to add that. It'll be out on October.
All right, 21st. So keep an eye out, October.
It's available for pre-release copies on Amazon now.
All right, well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, and the battery